Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope the content encourages you and helps you build your faith. Now enjoy the message.
I haven't read this for a little while. I started our season with it, but let me go to James chapter 2. Here is like the whole lens that you should view this book from. James 2, starting in verse 14, he says, "What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but don't show it by your actions?" There you go. What good is it? Can that kind of faith save anyone? That's a situational faith. He's not speaking to salvation. He's speaking to situation. He said, can having faith but no action really save your marriage? Can having faith but no action really help you with relationships? Can having faith with no action really help you overcome addiction? Can that save anybody? Can that do anything? Verse 15, suppose you see a brother who has no food or clothing and you say, "Goodbye, have a great day, stay warm and eat well," but then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do? Oh, I skipped too far. There we go. So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. Now, someone may argue, some people have faith, others have good deeds. But I say, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? I will show you my faith by my good deeds. You say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God. Good for you. Even the demons believe this and they tremble. How foolish. Can't you see that faith without action is useless? That's the viewpoint, right? That's the lens. So we take James, and everything we read in the book of James, we interpret through this viewpoint. What is the action my faith is being told to take? If you ask that question, every scenario you read through the book of James, what's the action my faith is being asked to take? What is the action my faith should take? And he will give you these competitions between worldliness and godliness, between being selfish and being a servant, between these different, and he'll position them this way. So let me read James chapter 4, 1 through 10 now, and you'll be able to catch a glimpse of what James is talking about, looking through the lens. What is the action my faith is asking me to take? He says, "What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask, and you ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. You adulterous people. Do you not know that friendship with the world makes you an enemy with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God." We're talking about the spirit of the world, not the people of the world. Verse 5, "Or do you suppose it is to no purpose that the scriptures say he yearns jealously over the spirit that he has made to dwell in us?" Verse 6, "But he gives more grace. Therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter turn to mourning and your joy to gloom." Verse 10, "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you." In verses 7 through 10 there, James gives 10 imperative Greek verbs. I told you we're about that action. He gives you 10 action steps that are imperative through 7 through 10. He says, okay, let me do this for you first. And usually I'll give you a point, and each point is self-contained. But here's what I want to do. I want to contextualize the first 6 verses for you, okay? So let me walk you into a place of context. Once you're in context, we'll dive into the 10, and this is a 2-part message. So we'll do the first 3 this week, and we'll try to knock out 7 next week. But the most important thing we grasp right now is the context of verses 1 through 6. It sets the stage for 7 through 10 and the actions we're supposed to take. I'll illustrate it for you like this. I was a server at a restaurant in a past life. Where are my servers at? Come on, where are you? Anybody? I got one back. Servers in a restaurant. You had been prior, or you are right now. Yes, right? It is like a brotherhood. Once you've done that, I think everybody should have to be a server at a restaurant for at least a day. You just need people to tell you what to do and then get mad at you when you don't get it right. You need that, right? It has to. It's like being a preacher, right? You need to. I'm just kidding, by the way, but you need to experience it. So I'm a server at a restaurant, like I said, in a past life. Massive restaurant chain in Kansas City. It was a Mexican restaurant because you know me, I'm eating chips and queso every time I go. And I'm probably the only person to ever do this. It was my second day on the job. I was carrying this massive tray, and I had chips and salsa and guacamole and like 6 drinks on it. And as I'm carrying it, they don't warn you how slick the floor is when you go from the kitchen to the dining room, and there's chips and oil and grease. And I slipped, and when I slipped, I lost that tray. And when I lost that tray, I saw it begin to tumble, and there was a man in a suit at a business meeting sitting right there, and I dumped drinks, guacamole, chips, and salsa down his back. I mean, I can still, in the nightmares of my mind, see guacamole just kind of rolling down the back of his suit jacket. And he was mad. He was not gracious, and he was unimpressed. And so I went and got my manager. My manager came out. He gave him $150 in dry cleaning gift cards. He gave him like 30 free appetizers, $200 in gift cards to the restaurant, did all of this stuff. And I told my manager, I was like, hey, thanks so much for looking out for me, man. And he said, no. He said, that's coming out of your check. So I'm literally the only person, I think, to ever start a job with a negative paycheck, right? I started, and I got my first check, and I still owed like $150 to the restaurant. It was just crazy. So anyway, I started to get the hang of it, started to enjoy being a server, and there was, being a server is all about the section that you get. You get a good section, you make good money. You get a bad section, and you don't get any good tips. And so there was this one section, it was called being up top. We just called it, hey, up top is your section. And so I got to that place where I got to be the waiter up top. It was a bunch of circle booths, and it's where all the big time people sat, and they left big tips, and it was a Friday night. The restaurant was packed. It was on a wait, and this group came in, and they skipped the entire line, and they go up and sit in this circle booth, and I'm their server, and I went up to them and said, hey, what can I get you? And they're ordering top shelf everything, and their tab is just racking up. And then the guy, he was the ringleader. He said, hey, come here, young man. And so I went up to him, and he said, I want a bowl of that lobster corn chowder. And we had just ran out. The kitchen just told, hey, we're out of corn chowder. 86, the corn chowder, it's gone. So I said to him, oh, sir, we actually just ran out of the lobster corn chowder. And he said, son, I'm sure you'll find some for me back there. Now, listen, if there's one thing I can't stand, it's arrogance. So I looked at him, and I was trying to be gracious, but at this point I was starting to get mad, and I said, sir, on the off chance that we happen to still not have any lobster corn chowder, could I interest you in a bowl of chicken tortilla? And he said, young man, you'll find me lobster corn chowder. I'd walk away. I was saved at this point, and the brother, lucky I was, right? So I walk away, I go back to my manager, and I said, hey, this jerk out there just told me I will find him some lobster corn chowder. My manager, what? He said that? And then he looked at the assistant manager and he said, he's here. He's here. I'm really going somewhere with all of this, by the way. He said, he's here. And the other man, he said, oh my, Ed's here? He said, Ed's here. Ed, I didn't know. I was like, who is Ed? Who is Ed? Aren't you going to take up for me with this guy? And he said, no. He said, Ed owns all of the chains of the restaurants. He said, find him the corn chowder now. So I'm running through the restaurant. I'm looking for corn chowder. I'm like, hey, are you finished with that? Is that still warm? And I found a bowl of lobster corn chowder in a to-go order at the bar, still in styrofoam. So I took that out of there. I was like, hey, just tell him it's gone, refund him. And I put it in a ceramic, warmed it up in the oven. I went out, presented it to Ed, and I said, bon appetit. I hope you enjoy, There's your bowl of corn chowder. And I walked back to the kitchen, and my manager looked at me. His name was Austin, and he said, listen to me. He said, here's what you need to know. Whatever Ed wants, Ed gets. And he said, if you want to keep your job here, you will do whatever he asks you to do. And the moment you don't, not only is it your head on the chopping block, but it's my head on the chopping block too for hiring you. So do whatever he asks. When James goes through the first 6 verses of James chapter 4, he's almost giving us the picture that we have the ability in our own sinful flesh, in our own pridefulness, to make God like our cosmic waiter, right? That God, I'm going to tell you what I want from you, and I'm going to place my order through prayer. That's like the only way Chick-fil-A has not figured out for you to order chicken, right? It's through prayer. They got the app, they got curbside, they got the drive-through. When they figure out how to make it able to order chicken through prayer, I'll never eat at another restaurant again. So you go to God, you ask him through prayer, God, I want this, do this for me, right? And the moment we don't get what we want, we're furious with him. And then instead of submitting to him, we say, well, if you're not going to give it for me, I'll take it myself. Watch this. God, you don't want to meet my desires? I gave you the opportunity to make me happy, so now I'm taking matters into my own hands and I'm doing whatever I want. That's James 1 through 6. Let me read it to you. James 4, he says, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you, is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? In other words, he is saying there is something in you that is causing this selfish battle between worldliness and godliness, between living how God wants you to live and living as a person of the world. It's not around you. That Greek word for among you is in you. And then he follows up in the latter part of the verse and he says, is it not the passions within you? Something is in you that is keeping you from living the way that God wants you to. It's the first reality that we have to come to. That there is something selfish or there is something jealous or there is something prideful within me that naturally makes me want to get what I want from God. And if he can't do it for me, I'll do it for myself. He even says so in verse 2, James 4 verse 2, he says, you desire and do not have, so you murder. A clearer translation would be you would go to the lengths of murder. So he's saying you desire this in you. And when you don't get it, you would go as far as to kill for it. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. In other words, he's saying what was wrong with you internally in verse 1 is now coming out of you externally in verse 2. So the dissatisfaction of your soul, the jealousy or the pridefulness that is in your heart that's keeping you from living a godly life and that's constantly leaving you at a place of not being fully satisfied is now coming out externally in all your relationships. Now your spouse is the target because your soul is unsatisfied. So you blow up and yell and rage out on them. Your kids are the victim because internally your soul's not right, so externally you're expressing it in these ways. Your friends become your punching bag because internally it's off, and so externally you're pushing it out and projecting it onto everybody else. And then he says, you have not because you ask not. Let me correct an interpretation really quick, because I've seen that verse used out of context so many times. Oh, brother, you have not because you ask not. Ask God for whatever you want, and he's going to give you whatever you want. No, James is saying you have not because you're asking the world for things that only God can provide. You have not because you ask not. In other words, the question that you're asking the world to satisfy is one that only God can fully satisfy within you. If you skip down to verse 3, he walks through this projection, James 4, verse 3. Here he tells you that. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly. You're asking God to do something for you that will only benefit your selfish desires and flesh. And he says, and then he says, to spend it on your passions. In other words, you have not because you ask not means ask God for whatever you want and God's going to give it to you. No, you have not because you ask not means you're asking the wrong people for the wrong things to satisfy a spiritual emptiness. And so then he says, and then even when you ask, you're asking with these selfish motives. We got to get rolling here. And so it culminates here. This is so good. And this is why I only have 3. I want to give you the context in the front. I know we started out choppy, but now it's all going to come together, right? So you see, it starts internally, it shows up externally, and then it's among everything. What I ask for God for, it's even all about me, and everything's about me, and it's this filling, this selfishness in my soul. James 4 through 5. If you don't feel beat up yet, this is just going to be the knockout punch, but I promise you, something great is coming. Just follow me here. James 4 through 5. It's like a Rocky movie. You get beat up for 12 rounds and win the 13th. You adulterous people. That means in context, everything that the word says. You adulterer, you cheater, you adulterous people. Do you not know that friendship with the world makes you an enemy with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Verse 5, this is really important. Or do you suppose it is to no purpose that the scriptures say he yearns jealously over the Spirit that he has made to dwell in us? In other words, he is saying, you've become a Christian, and God's placed his Spirit in you, and that Spirit is longing for you to commune with God and become more like him and to worship him and to serve him, but you're trying to feed that Spirit that he's placed within you with the world, with things of the world. And then he says, you adulterer. In other words, he is saying if you're trying to satisfy a spiritual need with a worldly solution and the Lord reveals it to your eyes right now, you should feel like you just walked into your house, opened up your bedroom door, and found your spouse with somebody else. He said it should break your heart. It should drop your stomach to your knees. Your mind should become cloudy. Your eyes should well up with tears, and you should have a rage and a hurt and have no idea how to express it because you finally realize that you have been trying to satisfy the Spirit that God has placed within you with something that the world can offer. You've been cheating on that Spirit that's within you. Okay, so now what do? Right? It's like, wow, I've been preaching to myself. I just shredded myself pretty good. I realize I'm a mess. I've got a selfish heart. I am chasing things of the world, trying to satisfy my spirit, and the Lord has just called me an adulterer. Got tore up pretty good on the first 15 minutes of that one. Now what do I do? I'm hearing the silence as that question right now. What do I do? Thank you so much for all of that. I'll just say, I say this all the time, but this really is my favorite verse in the Bible. In context, think about this. Just tore you up for 5 verses. James 4, verse 6. But he gives more grace. Oh, that's not what I was expecting. He gives more grace. James 4, verse 6. But he gives more grace. Can you say it with me? James 4, verse 6. But he gives more grace. Can we receive that? Because we just walked through saying, I am struggling and I failed here and I've been worldly here. What do? James says he gives more grace to you. You have cheated and he's given you more grace. You've lied and he gives more grace. You've hurt people and he gives more grace. You've looked at things you shouldn't and yet he gives more grace. You've been selfish, but he gives more grace. Do you feel the turn right there? That he says, here it is. You've got worldliness and you've got godliness. And here's what you've been doing. And to get to here, the first thing you need to understand is that God is gracious with you. That God forgives you. That God's grace is greater than your mistakes. That God's grace is greater than your past. That God's grace is greater than our own selfish desires and our own selfish tendencies. That he gives more grace. And then he poses kind of the password. What's the password? It's my son's new thing. He's always saying, what's the password, Daddy? Just make up a word, and if it's funny, he loves it, right? But James says, what's the password now? Because you realize where you need to go. You need to get to the place of godliness. You have identified the worldliness. You understand that God gives you more grace. What's the password to get there? He said, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. In other words, he says, here's your answer. God is gracious. Now let me give you 10 actions to take to walk in that grace. But the first thing you need to do is recognize that God's only going to do this for the one who's humble. God's only going to move in the one who humbly says, Lord, I need you. Lord, this is all about you. It's no longer about me and my pride. This is about me submitting to you. And now we've got 5 minutes left for 3 points. James 4, 7 through 10. I'm going to give you the 10 imperative actions. He's saying, these are the actions you have to take. Are you ready for them? James 4, 7 through 10. He says, submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves. Those are the 10. He says, hey, let me just give it to you. You have worldliness, you have godliness. God has more grace for you than your worldliness has disappointed him. So come on over into the place of godliness. If you're humble, you're going to be able to receive this. Here are 10 things you need to do. Here's the 3 that we're going to start with this week. Number 1, submit yourselves, therefore, to God. He says, number 1, if you want to walk in godliness now and you want to break this bondage of worldliness, you've got to submit. It's not submission until you disagree, right? So you've got to submit to the Lord here. My son, he is in the I want to wrestle, I want to fight mode. Is there anything more fun than that when your son wants to fight all the time? I get home, although he's getting pretty crafty at these surprise punches, if you know what I mean. I don't see it coming, sitting there working. He's the perfect height, and oh, buddy, wow, this was really fun. Let's fight in 10 minutes, right? But he always wants to fight. And so the other day we were wrestling, and I'm trying to teach him how to tap out, right? I'm like, no, son, let me teach you. Here, put me in a chokehold. So he's choking me, and he's squeezing on my neck, and I said, you got me. I said, I'm tapping out, let go. And so he lets go. He said, it's great. So now it's my turn, right? And it's like, I'm going to teach you a lesson really quick. Hey, and so we're wrestling around, and I spin him around, and I slam him on the couch, and I put him in a chokehold, and I got him there, and I'm sitting there choking on him. And he was a little bad that day, so I was teaching him a little bit of a lesson, but he's not purple or anything yet, right? So I'm squeezing on him, and I'm saying, tap out, son, tap out. And he's screaming, no, let me go. Get off of me now. And I'm saying, son, tap out. Like, come on. And Anna's like, you're going to kill him. What are you doing? This is so mean. I said, no, honey, it's how the game goes, right? He's got to learn this. He needs to. So I'm squeezing a little harder, and he's screaming. And you know how they get claustrophobic when you like pin him down and hold him. They just like, ah! And so I've got him and I'm revving him up and I'm squeezing him pretty good. And he's gurgling a little bit. And I'm like, listen, tap out, man. And he refuses. I'm like, what? Bub, like, come on, let go, mommy, help me, daddy. So finally I let him go. And what's he do when you let him go? Comes right back at you. He wants more. So he comes back again. And this whole cycle continued, and it ended with, all you moms are going to be like, I knew it. Him crying and him upset, and he's mad at daddy. And she's saying, why were you doing this? I knew this would happen. And I was saying to her, I'm just trying to teach the boy how to tap out. All I'm trying to do is teach him how to tap. But it's this dance that he and I play right now. It's what James is saying right here. Submit yourselves to the Lord. Tap out. Give up. Say, Lord, it's you. I submit to you. I submit unto you. The language itself is a military term, and it's a military term meaning submitting under authority for life. It means you are submitting to a place where you're saying, if you tell me to hold the front line and it could cost me my life, I'm going to hold the front line and I'm going to submit, and it may cost me my life, but at least I know I was submitted unto you. James says if you want to grow in godliness, the first thing you have to do is be willing to submit. Be willing to tap out. Be willing to say you're in charge. Number 2. He says, resist the devil and he will flee from you. So number 1, you got to submit. Number 2, you have something to resist. Another story about Canaan. Man, I'm going to owe him. So every time I use a child in an illustration, I owe him an ice cream. This kid's doubled up today. If he doesn't find out, it won't hurt him. But I mean, I could do a Frosty this afternoon too. So anyways, another Canaan story, you got to resist something. You got to stop. The other night, he and I were playing outside, and man, we were fighting and throwing water balloons and having a great time, and he got eaten alive by mosquitoes, right? Just his entire body, he got eaten everywhere. So we gave him a bath, and we were putting him to bed, and he's scratching everything. And I'm saying, son, stop itching them, right? If you stop itching them, they'll go away. If you keep doing that, they're going to itch worse, and they're going to break up, and they're going to start bleeding, and but he's like, okay, I'll try. 15 minutes later, he's screaming, Dad! I come into his room, and he's like, whole body's itching, and he's scratching everything. And I'm saying, son, listen, resist the itch, and they'll go away. But you have to resist that initial, like, I gotta do. It's where we're at with James. James is saying, you've got to submit, and then right after you submit, isn't it ironic, a temptation will come. And you have to be willing to say, Lord, I've submitted to you, and I have a desire to look at this. I have a desire to say this. I have a desire to reach out to that person again. I have a desire to do these things, but I'm not going to scratch that itch, and I know that you will make it go away. Jesus models us this in Matthew 4, 8 through 11. It says, next the devil took him to a peak very high on a mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. The devil said, I will give it to you, he said, if you kneel down and worship me. Get out of here, Satan. Jesus told him, for the scriptures say you must worship the Lord your God and serve only him. Verse 11, then the devil went away. And angels came and took care of Jesus. We submit, tap out, say, Lord, you're in control now, not me. Second thing we do is resist. I am not going there anymore. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not being a part of that anymore. And then he wraps up with this. The third thing is draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Matthew 17, Jesus illustrates this again through his sermon. He says, from then on, Jesus began to preach, repent of your sins and turn to God. It's the same word, draw near to God, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So, I have this thing that we do at my house, talking about drawing near. How do you draw near? Anna and I, we've been married 9 years now, known each other and been together for over 10. And I'll be honest with you, early on in our marriage, we just we're kind of like fire and gasoline. We have this personality where when we're on the same page, we're unstoppable. And when we're not on the same page, it's like Mr. and Mrs. Smith in our house, right? It's like who can kill the other one first, you know? And it's just, we've just been that dynamic. And over the years, we've figured out how even when we don't like each other, we can love each other. But there was a time it was either like, I'm drawing near to you or I want nothing to do with you. And if you come near me, it's on. It's a problem, right? And so throughout the course of our marriage, we've had these times where we get an argument and it escalates and I don't want nothing to do with her and she doesn't want nothing to do with me. But there's always been something in our marriage that has drawn us back together. It is an action. Now listen, you dirty-minded little, like, oh my goodness, he's taking us into the bedroom. No, I'm not. But when I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about it has always been, and now it is something where, fellas, I'm going to tell you, I could make her so mad, so upset. She don't want to speak to me. She wants nothing to do with me. And am I lying? There is one way to draw near right back to your heart, is it not? And does it happen often? Not as much as it used to, though, right? Come on, give me, you're pregnant right now, so I mean, can I show you? I'll show you. Come on up here. Come on, yes. Give her a hand. I gave her a warning like 60 seconds before church that I was going to do this. So this is what I do. You're mad at me, right? Come on, give me that mad face. Oh, that's not it. I want to be pretty and mad at the same time. Come on, give me that mad face. There it is. And so she's mad, and she's not talking to me, and this is what I will do. I just taught my son this, by the way. Works for him as well. And so I realize when I've done something wrong, and I'm like, oh, Luke, you screwed up. What's the one thing you can do to draw near again? And I come into the room, and she's like ignoring me. You know how they do that? They just ignore. They act like you're not even there, you know, but they're also waiting for you to talk. It's really kind of weird. It's like, I don't want to talk to you, but if you say the right thing, I will. And so I come in, and I say, dear Anna, all wonderful, almighty, all precious Anna, I don't belong at your feet, but if you'll just receive the apology of your peasant, I will kiss your feet. Come on, right? Does it work every time?
Every time.
Every time. It works. You're out there thinking, I would never do that. There'll be a moment where it'll cross your mind, and you'll think, you know what? I need to, no, really, it is in our relationship, what we have learned is if we'll take a step to draw near, even in the midst of distance, in the midst of frustration, no matter how hard it is, no matter how far you feel away from each other, no matter how hurt you are, no matter how annoyed you are, no matter how ashamed you are, no matter how unworthy you feel, if you will take that initial step to draw near every single time, we come back closer together. Every single time. It's what James is saying here. Will you just draw near? His grace is greater, so it doesn't matter how you feel right now. What matters is if you will draw near, if you will humbly, out of the humility of your heart, say, Lord, I draw near to you. I come back to you. Receive me back and renew me again.
Everybody, thanks again for joining us. We believe God has something great for your life, and we hope this message encouraged you to take the next step in your faith. Have a great week.